Yo guys, welcome to the video. This is Milky, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the updates to the Lightning Invoker Monk. Based on the changes made by GGG, there were a few impacts on the build that I have shared so far. In regards to those first two videos, I just want to say, I don't normally make build content, so I'm learning as I go, and I realize that I may have taken a few things for given that people may know, so I'm going to try and go into as much detail as possible in this video, so that I'm not missing anything. Some of the most common questions I will answer towards the back end of the video, but let's start out with what changed. Obviously, we got into a pretty good setup with the Falling Thunder. I almost made a video last night, but I had a feeling something like this might happen. We were playing Falling Thunder. We had that big projectile, big bomb AoE that we were doing, and we were able to spam it because of our power charge generation. But now, thanks to the changes to cast on shock, which we can check in here. So before we were gaining the ability to cast Profane Ritual once every 2 shocks. Now it's once every 20 shocks, so you can see how that might be a problem. Profane Ritual, for the people that don't know, is a skill that deals base chaos damage, but none of that matters. What it does is it consumes a corpse in order for you to get a power charge in return. We can use this with Reaper's Invocation, but just before we get into that, let me talk about cold damage. Cold damage and freezing enemies shatters corpses, which completely obliterates the ability to use Profane Ritual for that massive overflow of power charges. It is a very good way to go about sustaining power charges to use Charge Staff, but in a build like this where I want to generate as many as I can to spam abilities that use power charges, it just doesn't cut. It just doesn't give enough. So Combat Frenzy and going cold damage is not really possible for this version of the build that I want to do. I understand it exists. A lot of people have mentioned it. Just get that out of the way. So Reaper's Invocation is an alternative. This is what we started with, and we're going right back to it. Every time we kill an enemy with a melee attack, which is very important, we gain energy. Now you would think this means that we could just one-to-one swap it for Cast on Shock and we could keep playing Falling Thunder. Sadly, Falling Thunder is a slam skill that fires projectiles, and the projectiles are what does the majority of the killing, and they do not count as a melee attack, so we cannot generate energy for Reaper's Invocation with Falling Thunder. Now, early on, this wasn't that much of a problem, as most of the time we were just walking through the map with Tempest Flurry and Charge Staff, but now, in the end game, we kind of want to be able to spam those abilities. It's cool to spam, the spender abilities. It's the whole point we're trying to gain so many power charges, is to spend them on those high impact abilities. So, no to Falling Thunder for Reaper's Invocation, but for one skill, it works absolutely beautifully, and that skill is Flicker Strike, which is going to be music to some of your ears, and others are going to absolutely hate the idea, and you're going to be looking for a different reroll immediately. All I can say is Flicker Strike is definitely the way to go now, at least on this version of the build at the moment. I haven't found anything else for Falling Thunder yet, but for Flicker Strike, first of all, it's a melee skill, so we can actually generate the energy we need for Reaper's Invocation, but it actually has some nice interactions with the delay with Profane Ritual. So when you use Profane Ritual, there is a delay on the skill for you gaining the power charge. You see the base duration is 2 seconds. Well, that normally would be a weakness, right? You would cast it and you'd be having to stand around and wait for your power charges. But with Flicker Strike, because Reaper's Invocation has 0 cast time, you can cast it mid-Flicker Strike, and by the time that you land, that 2 seconds is up, and your power charges come flying in, and you couldn't have gained them during Flicker Strike anyway, right? You cannot gain power charges while using this skill. It says it right there. So we Flicker Strike, we activate our Reaper's Invocation when we see our Flicker Strike killing a pack of enemies, and then by the time we land, all those power charges come flying in, and we just go again. Beautiful. We can get that pretty much an instant cycle of Flicker Strikes going. Now, it does require there to be mobs, and in a lot of maps it feels like the mobs are working from home. They phoned in sick today. Sometimes there's not enough mobs for Flicker Strike to feel really, really good, and in those cases it kind of is what it is. You just have to run around killing them normally, and you'll Flicker Strike when you see a big pack of enemies. But in the truly juicy stuff like Breaches, Breaches, Corruption, Expedition, Delirium, feels really, really good. So that's why we're using Flicker, and it is very nice, but Flicker has some other interesting properties. It doesn't convert any of our damage into elemental like all our other skills do, right? We have Charge Staff that adds a lot of elemental, and then we have Tempest Flurry that converts 60% of the damage to lightning damage, and all this is to benefit from one of our ascendancies. We've swapped from the Soul Springs Eternal over to Sunder My Enemies. This means that critical hits ignore non-negative enemy monster elemental resistance. What this means is we can save any points that we would have otherwise put into elemental penetration, and it means we can use multiple different elements. Eventually we may think about coming to grab elemental expression, but that's a little bit further down the line. So Son of My Enemies allows us to save a lot of points on the tree, notably these damage pen nodes, these pen nodes here, we have these pen nodes up here. We don't have to bother with any of that anymore. We just want to spec crit. Obviously crit doubles up. Now crit allows us to pen, and it gives us the bonus from critical damage bonus as well. So crit being a much better stat later on. You want to grab the crit over here, this crit, and this wheel of crit here, as well as maybe getting some crit on your gear and jewels. That's when you want to swap. All these will be linked in the description, by the way, the planners and everything. There are some decisions I've made. Currently going dynamism for the extra meta skill energy. We gain an extra, 31%, as well as getting 40% increased damage. This skill does nothing for us. May change this eventually if I find that we're getting enough charges without it, but it does feel nice to play with, and it is 40% damage regardless. So that's the tree. It will be in the description. There's not too much else to talk about on the tree. Other than mana, I guess. Siphon is very important. Siphon and 1 mana leech roll has been more than enough for me to sustain my mana. One other thing I can talk about in regards to Flicker Strike is the weapon. You have two options. I have a physical damage weapon that I've been testing. Obviously, our Flicker then won't penetrate enemy resistance because it will only be doing physical damage. And in that case, you definitely will want to use Lightning Infusion so that your Flicker Strike gains some elemental damage, and a portion of your damage you do with it can actually penetrate the enemy res. If not, you can go with an elemental damage weapon now that we're on Flicker. And this fire damage does come in handy as well, as we're going to be able to ignite the Tempest Bell, which causes that to do a bit more damage with the Shockwave, 30% more damage per ailment. So there's a lot of different things we can do weapon-wise. Honestly, my main recommendation probably would be at the beginning, get just the highest DPS weapon you can that has crit chance. That's probably the best recommendation I can give right now until we really start to number crunch and figure this one out. For me, I'm going to stick with the elemental for a little bit just to try out. I just bought this, it's new. I'm going to try it, see if it feels better than the alternative. But it does have some drawbacks, right? We deal less physical damage, so we leech less life and mana, which we get on our gear. You only get leech from physical damage. So that does cause us to get less, but if we can survive without it, it'll be great. Now, we'll talk about the skills. We'll go over all of these. Tempest Flurry is still our kind of builder skill that we use when we have no power charges. It converts damage to physical. It's not the most important quality. I would say, though, GCPs are pretty cheap. If you can quality all your gems, it is a big boost. All mine are qualityed now, and it feels really nice. I haven't qualityed this one, though. I should definitely do that. Definitely get quality on Flicker Strike immediately. As soon as you switch to Flicker Strike, get quality, because 20% chance to not remove charges combined with 35% from the support gem is huge. That's 55% chance not to consume charges. So definitely get quality on your Flicker Strike. The rest you can kind of live without until you get some money going. Flicker Strike's the one to get. On Tempest Flurry, we have Martial Tempo, Primal Armament, Inspiration, Overcharge for those highest shocks, and Soul Thief for a bit more mana leech. Tempest Spell, we're using Rage, Overabundance, and Conk Effect for more damage. Charge Staff, we have Conduction, Persistence, Innovate, and Shock Siphon for that ES recovery. And then I'm trying something out here. So we have two options in this final slot. We have Hand of Tula, Voltaic Mark, Culling Strike, and Magnified Effect. I found myself never using this though, so I'm going with this buff skill instead, which basically makes it so my entire Flicker Strike, after I use this, gains 39% of damage as extra chaos damage. As well as that, it gives me a buff for 6 seconds that gives me 7% damage as extra chaos damage, and this stacks up to 10 times. This is a lot more damage. And the support gem that can only be used on this gives 15% more damage to that entire Flicker Strike. So just trying out Mantra of Flames. It also gives Culling Strike to Flicker Strike, so yeah, it's a very cool combo with Flicker Strike, and you're going to gain all the Flames of Tula in one Flicker Strike most of the time. Just trying it out. Pretty cool. Flicker Strike itself, we're using with Perpetual Charge, Close Combat, Momentum, and Lightning Infusion. If you are using an elemental damage weapon, you will want to swap off of Lightning Infusion, and I would say to go with the Conk Effect onto the Flicker Strike if you're doing that. That would be the change if you're using an elemental weapon. Otherwise, that supported attacks deal less cold and fire is gonna hurt a bit more, right? Reaper's Invocation is Profane Ritual, Impetus, Profusion, and Energy Retention. Ghost Dance is Fast Forward, Cannibalism for some life on kill. Wind Dancer with Pin and Lockdown. This basically makes it so that if you do get hit with Wind Dancer, you let out that kind of that shockwave around you, and you'll knock back enemies. You got more chance to pin them, more chance, and it just gives you a bit more breathing room when you do get hit. And then Herald of Thunder, which another good quality target, by the way, is it does give more attacks to Herald of Thunder Bolt, which is quite a decent amount of damage. And then we have blind, maim, and lightning mastery on this. So that's the skills. Not much different other than the mantra and the flicker, I guess. Maybe some support changes. But you can tinker around with these. Just make sure you get quality on the flicker strike. That's the most important thing. For gear, weapon we've already gone over. Helmet. For the most part on most of these items early on, the most important thing for you to do is to cap your resistance, being elemental and chaos res if possible. Chaos res being the harder one to do, but chaos damage is very lethal in this game. So if you can cap chaos, definitely try to. Then mana leech is probably on par with those. You need a mana leech roll. So mana leech, cap your res, and then we can start thinking about more exotic suffixes. Things like critical hit chance on the helmet, critical hit chance on our amulet that I don't have yet. Yeah, rarity even, stuff like that. Attack speed on your gloves. All these kind of more exotic suffixes you can think about getting once you have better gear and you've capped your resistances and you have access to leech. And for the remainder of the gear, it's mainly life. Life and defense would be the same for the prefixes on all of your items, right? Except some sources we can get flat damage, and that kind of works the same way I was saying about the suffixes, where you can get the more exotic damage ones later on. The same goes for your prefixes. Focus on defense first, and then think of the offense as more of a luxury, because we do enough damage to consider offense more of a luxury. Get those later. Focus on capping your res, getting defense, before looking into those more damage-orientated affixes on your gear. And then, but the one I would say is an exception is movement speed. Get as much movement speed as you can, as well as resistance. So I'm not going to show the gear individually, because I think if you follow those things I just said, your gear can look very different to mine, but achieve the same things. I don't think anyone should go out and try and emulate my gear one-to-one. It's about ticking boxes, right? Life, ES, energy shield, evasion, physical leech on mana and life, flat damage, crit chance. Stats where you need them. Stats, allocate them as you need them. You don't need too much strength in this build. We need 35 for our supports. So you only need 35 strength. In, we only need... I think our highest in is probably like 100. Yeah, we really don't need much int at all. But we do need 178 dex. So that's the highest one. You need 178 dex and then like 100 in. I've got this as carryover from when I was using Cast on Shock. But now we're not, we can drop some of the int. So I could actually drop this int roll on my chest, for example. And we'd be absolutely fine. So that's it. Now, for the FAQ stuff, a lot of people ask the question, how do you generate power charges against bosses? The answer is, we have to do a respec to gain power charges against bosses. And the reason I'm okay with that is because I have done maps from tier 1 to T15, and not once have I been in a situation where I didn't have power charges from the map to take with me into the boss room. You know there's a boss in the map, you can prepare for it. I recommend doing that. Now, in different situations, like pinnacle bosses, the answer changes quite a lot. There are two options available to us on pinnacle bosses. One, we can use Siphoning Strike, which requires us obviously to take the shock off the boss to gain a power charge. But the better option, and the one that I'm probably going to go for, is a 2 passive point swap against pinnacle bosses. I will allocate Resonance, and then I will allocate Hand of Chiula with Sniper's Mark, so that when I crit an enemy, it grants me a Frenzy Charge back. So that Frenzy Charge will then be turned into a Power Charge with Resonance, and this will be enough Power Charges to max stack your Charge Staff against bosses. Because obviously we're not going to be Flicker Striking against bosses. There's no way we can generate enough Power Charges for that. So against bosses, we're really going to want to juice up our Charge Staff and Tempest Flurry. When I do more bosses and I tinker with the bossing setup, I will link it to you, but there is definitely going to be a small swap for situations where you want to do pinnacle bosses. It just is the way of this build, being more of a map-focused build with power charge spending. There we go. Next, we have the vials. The vials from the campaign you get in Act 3 and Act 6. I chose Stun Threshold. I chose Ailment Threshold and Chaos Resistance. The next one is, how do I have so much Spirit? You get 100 from the campaign. A lot of people have missed this somehow. You get 100. The first 30 comes from defeating the King in the Mists in Act 1. And the next 70 come from the same boss, but in Act 3 and Act 6. And it is the boss in the Azak Bog called Ignagduk, the Bog Witch. Kill her twice in Normal and Cruel. You will get 70 and 30 from the King in the Mists in Act 1. He's right here. In Freythorn. That's 100. I guess one thing I will add as an addendum onto the power charge generation, if you are in the campaign, just use Siphoning Strike. This isn't intended to be a leveling guide, but if you are in the campaign, Siphoning Strike should more than suffice. Or you can use that setup that I just mentioned with Hand of Chula, Sniper's Mark, and come and spec into Resonance. But obviously it will make your mapping a bit worse. So I'd probably just go with Siphoning Strike during the campaign. The last thing we'll go over is Jewels. Obviously I was using the Collide Jewels with Terrain, which is very good for Falling Thunder, but not very good for Flicker Strike. So I'm going to have to change these. But the mods you want to look out for are critical strike chance, attack speed, and then just generic damage. You can get damage with quarter staves, melee damage, attack damage. Damage against rare and unique enemies is pretty good too. Any combination of those things with a priority on attack speed and critical hit chance. They're going to be best ones. And obviously crit damage as well. Very good. There you go. So I hope this video was helpful and I helped you figure out how to maybe change your build over to the crit version and go Flicker Strike from Falling Thunder. I really enjoyed that skill, so 07 to Falling Thunder. Hopefully we can figure out how to make it work in the future as kind of a main skill. But as for right now, we are embracing the Flicker lifestyle. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.